This is Restless. Welcome back to Restless, which is a post-mortem on the young, restless, and reformed. I am joined by my co-host, Michael Bowman. I'm Matt, and this show today is brought to you by coffee. And how are you doing tonight, Michael?
I'm not drinking coffee, so I just have water. I guess I'm just not very fun like that, but that's that.
I'm convinced this podcast will be fun because we are being joined by a guest today. We are being joined by Stephen Wolfe. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, will you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So, what I do? I'm currently actually work for the military, but actually I have graduate degrees, political science and philosophy. I've written on theology and political theology, philosophy. Also co-host of the Ars Politica podcast. So I want to plug that a little bit. So Ars Politica, we talk about kind of like right-wing politics, also theology and some other stuff. So that's basically me.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we wanted to have you on the show, because we are looking at the movement New Calvinism and its aftermath from lots of different angles. And I think while our show isn't political, we can't pretend that New Calvinism doesn't have very clear political portions to the movement, right, Michael? What would you say about that?
Yeah, so we actually recently, when we're recording this anyway, had an episode released where we were talking. We interviewed an academic scholar, sociologist, who wrote the book Reformed Resurgence, and all about the New Calvinism. And we released an episode where we were kind of reacting to this. And one of the things we've talked about is how early on in the New Calvinism, there was this desire by many, young evangelicals to leave behind the old religious right. We don't want to be in this position where, our beliefs are, so intricately tied to being part of the Republican Party. And it feels a little bit like how we felt like all that's really happened, at least within the New Calvinist movement, is not as much a change of the way that evangelicalism was tied to politics, but just the figures are different. So instead of, Pat Robertson or someone like that, we now have a Russell Moore. And so the politics is different, but the way that these things are connected and relate to each other doesn't seem to have really changed. And so we were kind of bemoaning that fact. And so it's great to have somebody who's maybe thought about this a little bit deeper than we have. And we're very much looking forward to getting your take on some of that.
Yeah, I'll jump off where that conversation left is. So there was this kind of promise inherent that, we're not just going to have baptized Republican politics anymore. There's going to be this kind of, I don't know what you would want to call it, some kind of uniquely Christian idea. And these, new leaders kind of replace the moral majority leaders in evangelicalism. And Michael and I kind of were left wondering in our conversation, I don't know that they're doing any better in doing Christian political theology. Stephen, what would you say about this topic?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to say, but and where to start. I'd say one thing is that most I call them evangelical elites, so we get into that a little bit later. But I think that they don't really even have a political theology, or if they do, they don't actually use it publicly. They don't apply it consistently. They don't publicly. They don't let it work out and explain their choices, who they criticize, why they criticize, who they praise, when they stay silent. And I think what the Evangelical Elite have done is, I think they've implemented a sort of program. They have a program. I usually say it's a program of moral witness, but it's a program in the sense that it's trying to socialize you into ways of thinking, but also just ways of reacting. So some Republican does or says this, you're supposed to complain and say something on Twitter and react to it in very particular ways. But if a Democrat or a liberal or a leftist does something similar or the opposite and just as bad, something worthy of being blamed or condemned, that you don't say anything, or you talk about it in different ways. So one way on if criticizing the right, it's usually criticism of very specific things and people and events or situations. But when the left does something that is bad, it's usually talked in terms of the brokenness of the world, brokenness of humanity. So it spreads out the blame. So somehow it touches upon us as well because we're broken. And so, but where the right, it's like, no, explicitly, this is bad. So there's just ways. That's just an example of this a program, this idea of socializing you into how you react, when to react. And usually they kind of are the cue, that they cue you into it through Twitter. I mean, one classic example, Russell Moore was kind of beat up about this, rightly, where he condemned, he went all out against the Capitol rushing on
Right.
the floor of the Capitol, and but he was silent, to my knowledge, about all the violence during last summer with Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all that. And that's just a very good example of how they pick and choose what they're going to criticize, what they're going to react to. And they kind of cue their followers into this reaction, and then they get praised for being such great witnesses. And so there's just this, I think, again, it's a socialization. And that's just one issue. We could say a lot more, but
Yeah, I think that is a phenomenon everyone listening is familiar with. Let me play a little bit of the devil's advocate. They would say, right, well, I'm just holding my own side to a higher standard, right? I think that's how they would defend themselves. How would you respond to that kind of this kind of response?
yeah. So that there's something good in that. Of course, you want to keep your own side. One of the issues, though, is that if you're going to say for an entire election year that's okay to vote for Democrats and liberals and for abortionists or whatever, it's okay to vote for them. Well, if that's the case, then criticizing the left is criticizing your own side, right? I mean, there's plenty of people
That's true.
that there's plenty of people on their side, or there's plenty of evangelicals that they're friends with and have platformed who have openly said they voted for Biden and and support left-wing causes. So if that's the case, then attacking the left is attacking your own side. I think also the way that they attack the right is in ways that empower the left, and also, but more specifically, stifle the evangelicals from acting, from being political, or you could say redirecting them to support whatever the left also supports. But it's in this, it's in a sense spiriting. So we get we get kind of excited about certain political principles and policies that we agree with, and we can kind of assert those publicly and be very kind of just very assertive. But but a lot of the criticism that these guys will place upon the right, or evangelical right, or whatever you want to call them, end up actually stifling that spirit to be political. And so there's like this twin action of it's kind of despiriting for causes that are uniquely evangelical and right wing, where at the same time being silent or supporting the things that the left support, and also doing them in very naive ways. So the idea that it's just about Confederate statues and not about eliminating all of American history, that sort of thing, where you, in a very naive sense, you have us redirect our energy toward these things in a naive way to the left, while also kind of stifling that spirit from the right. So
Yeah, I think the other thing with this, that if their audience is Christians, right, and you're going to spend all of this time criticizing the right, saying, it might be sinful for you to vote for certain politicians on the right, and you go this direction, even if you are supposedly not on the left, the general consensus would be that generally, because of issues like abortion, right, like the gender issues, right, like most of the 10 commandment issues, I'm going to generally support politicians on the right. Sorry if I tip my hand, Michael. If you then say, well, it's probably sinful to vote for those people, there's only really one effect this can have on me, right, as a right-leaning evangelical.
Yeah, and yet at the same time they were silent when people wanted to vote for people on the left.
Right.
So but that just goes back to, again, it's a kind of a program.
Sure.
And it's really the way I understand it, as they are evangelical elites. And by elite, I mean that they are part of kind of the elite class of society. They're just the evangelical wing of the elites broadly in society. And so what is it? What's the background assumptions? What's the background, I guess you could say, their station or their role, better put, their role in society? Well, as evangelical elites, they tailor their program or the way they socialize and how to react based upon what will nullify evangelicals as a threat to the ruling class. So if you just look at it from that perspective, everything kind of makes sense. Everything kind of makes sense why they act in certain ways, why they expect you to react in these ways. Well, if you are perceived to be a threat to the ruling class, which is a left-wing dominated ruling class, or you can kind of say like a liberal left, and they're not true leftists, but kind of this liberal left ruling class, then in order to be a moral witness to these people, you can't be this assertive, threatening guy who wants to implement your morality, and let alone kind of support your own kind of specific evangelical causes, like the ability to explicitly advocate policies that will benefit evangelicals as a group or Christians as a group. Instead of doing all that, they focus upon having you be non-assertive in those areas, but assertive in the ways that they like, that the left likes. And that means that you do not vote for someone like Donald Trump. You do not support someone like Donald Trump. You don't support people on the right who are explicitly trying to combat and be assertive against the left. But it's okay. So that means you have to kind of retreat from that side, and you have to support like the American Solidarity Party or something like that, or these other kind of squishy candidates like a Ben Sass, where they're really kind of, they talk a lot about principles, universal principles, but they're just naive and get run over. So you have to, and that's all. So really, it's okay for you to support those people because those people are not threats. They're not threatening. It's okay for you to support those kind of politicians or those leaders. And like a Mitt Romney is becoming more popular now as well. And so, and again, the principle behind it is we need to have a certain posture, a certain moral witness to the world that nullifies us as a threat, and I think also makes us, like I said before, naively support the left. So that this is why this is why we should not directly criticize Black Lives Matter and their narrative history or anything like that. But we can definitely make a big deal about a bunch of Christian shaman or whatever stormed the Capitol. Make that the worst thing that ever happened, and buy into that narrative, and while being silent about BLM. It's all about this Anabaptist, this like neo-Anabaptist type of moral witness program. That really, I don't think is consistent with the Reformed tradition, political theology, and the ability to actually assert yourself in politics and try to change it and actually be combative, fight the people and don't be naive, actually struggle for your own policies, and treat Christians as a group that is worthy of being specifically advocated for. So you don't have to talk about universality, all this stuff. But anyway, so yeah, again, I can think as evangelical elites, they are trying to make sure that we as a group are not threatening. And that's part of how they think they're going to win them over.
It's really interesting that one of the things the Reformed Resurgence, the argument he makes in that book is that these new leaders, whether it be Russell Moore, all these new evangelical elites who have this general Reformed flavor, placed themselves in gatekeeper roles, right?
Yep.
Placed themselves in these elite roles. And he said that was largely the result of what was the result of the Reformed Resurgence. Michael, I have a bunch of questions. Do you want to ask something specific before we keep going?
Yeah, no, this is really fascinating and really interesting to me. So one of the things that I've seen you post about online in this regard is within this program, this kind of moral performativity that has to be done online with regard to, certain events or certain things that happen. I was thinking, I've seen this a lot from progressive leaning friends of mine online, who will say stuff like, if you've ever posted something against homosexuality, for instance, but you're silent when it comes out that Ravi Zacharias is, a sexual deviant, then there's something wrong with you. That's a problem with you, right? And so if you ever condemn anything, then you have to now be in a place where you have to condemn everything. If you're on the right, if you are more conservative, obviously that doesn't, apply to us though, who are telling you this, because obviously they don't condemn everything, although they do seem to follow a very standard program of, what is it that we can all collectively, air our grievances about, and it becomes some kind of large hashtag or something like that. But I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit more about kind of the online moral performativity that goes on through these different new Calvinists or, whatever they are now, the kind of, TGC crowd and what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, I think that these guys tend to see credibility, moral credibility, as their central argument, or it's essential to anything that they say. And that doesn't matter if it's just straight up proposition that can be true or false, or a logical argument. Even if you could give a syllogism that is perfectly valid, but because you lack the moral credibility, because you condemn this but not that, therefore you can't assert it. They don't explicitly say that, but that after observing these guys for a number of years, that's what I think, that's what I see, is everything is a matter of this moral credibility.
Was it I'm trying to think of who it was. Jonathan Leeman. One of his arguments for not reopening churches at a certain point, I don't remember when this was in the whole when you should or shouldn't reopen churches debate. But one of Jonathan Leeman of, Nymark's Capitol Hill Baptist Church, I think is where he's at, or, he's in DC, I think, writes a lot about politics. But one of his arguments was that, you don't want to waste your cultural capital as an evangelical church on, reopening at the wrong time or something like that. And one of the things that he was challenged on because of that, I remember online, is at the same time he was saying that, he was also marching with Black Lives Matter at different times. And so there was this kind of weird, well, you can do that, but you can't open a church. And what is, but that makes a lot of sense in the system that you're laying out. Anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, I think in the case for me, the idea of social capital, that's kind of I think a separate, we could talk, there's more to say on that. I'll just briefly say that for social capital, that assumes there is such a thing, or that we have social capital. That is, I think, kind of delusional. Social capital meaning that people who are not us, or people that are non-Christian or non-evangelical, have some sort of, that we have social capital that we can kind of cash in at certain points. I do wonder, even if we do have that, when we could, what would they choose to actually, when would they choose to cash
the
in on it?
time?
That specifically,
right.
because everything for them is that you notice their rhetoric, kind of get away from moral performativity, but if you notice their rhetoric, everything that they say that is in support of something evangelical, let's say of religious liberty, everything goes back to reference to all of humanity, or helps everyone. It's universal.
Yeah.
There's never ever an argument where they'll just say this is good for the Christian church,
Yeah.
and they'll leave it at that. They always have the reference to, well, if you stop religious liberty and this, and then it affects religious liberty for everyone, which is of course not the case. We all know that the ruling class is willing to attack specifically Christian beliefs, or just Christians, even if they are actually shared by some non-Christian groups, but they'll never actually go after the non-Christian groups. Take like Muslims, they'll never ever go after something specific that Muslims hold because of religious liberty. They will anyway. I just don't think that we don't have social capital in the first place, and also the rhetoric we use, that's just another problem. We should, as Christians, say what is good for the Christian church, and that should be part of our political program. But so with another thing with moral performativity and this idea of credibility is, it makes it so when I say moral performativity, what I mean is that they have to, either this comes very natural to them, which is maybe one of the gifts why they become an elite, or it's very deliberate, but they do these things on Twitter where they just kind of pick and choose what they're going to condemn. And I sometimes think it's got to be exhausting to try to figure out what do I condemn today out of the 100 things that I can condemn, and what can I praise? And I think because there's so many different choices for you to every day to pick and choose, and what you're going to praise and blame, that what people do choose actually reveals something you can then kind of infer what their background assumptions are. But this moral performativity, if you interpret that, like I've said before, it's this idea of nullifying you as a threat to the ruling class. But it's also a sort of performance. It's the idea of when I have enough credibility, somehow if I condemn this, then I will build up my credibility, so that when I assert things, people will listen and they'll believe that I'm right. And what this has led to in their rhetoric is that they often don't actually, in their articles, they actually often don't make arguments. They don't make normal, like you could say traditional classical arguments where they try to have some sort of propositions that together form a conclusion, or they have inductive reasoning where they show examples and it leads to a conclusion. They don't do any of that, or they don't do much of that, because in the end, what backs their actual conclusions is this credibility from their moral performativity. And so I think it goes all the way back. So you read an article and you just, like, on politics or whatever it is, and you're shaking your head like, how did this why does this person who has a PhD and maybe a seminary professor, or a college, or a seminary president, why would he make such a garbage article like this? And that's because, well, he doesn't have to make an argument. He doesn't have to actually make a clear, sound, valid argument. It's all backed by his own credibility that he's developed over his public presence, its moral performativity. And so it's all connected. And that I think is just, this might be dynamics of the online world or modern world or whatever it is, but I think that helps us kind of understand, kind of interpret what they're up to.
When I describe often, whether it's Christian or not at this point, the arguments used online for something is, I often just say, oh yeah, I get it. You're a good person. Don't be a monster, right? Like is the like essential, if you bring it down to what it's arguing. So if, they're in this elite class, I think they're seeing the Western culture, go pretty hard secular. I mean, is this all being done out of a desire to, I hate the phrase seat at a table, but I know they use it, but right, keep Christianity in some case in the public square so that there can be a witness, so their institutions aren't attacked, right? Is that the, I mean, maybe we can't talk about motives, because probably there are some better and worse ones, but is that kind of the idea behind this?
That's a good question. I almost kind of avoid the motivation argument.
It's probably good.
And not, I'm not saying it for moral reasons. I'm saying because I don't think you have to go there.
Okay.
And this might be, I mean, I guess people could say that my reasoning is speculative, but I think that their mind has been, that it's sort of a psychological thing. That it just feels uncomfortable for them to see Christians being assertive and assert their own Christian interests, and that causes discomfort, and it's more comforting, or you could say maybe comforting. I could say that there's more cognitive tranquility. Let's put it that way, in following this program as I've described. So I think it's more than that. It's also just it's a sort of role that they've found themselves in, and the people who are successful in elite evangelicalism, that they follow that same pattern, that they fit this pattern of people who kind of, in other words, they get with the program, and so it's not simply motivation. It's just simply that they can't conceive, or somehow that they are blocked by sort of discomfort, psychological kind of discomfort from doing this or that, and saying this or that. So it's just, for example, I mean, they are practically incapable of criticizing anyone who's non-white. I don't want to get all racialist here, but it's just the case that they feel uncomfortable. Sure. Just as it is uncomfortable for us to even talk about this idea, that they feel uncomfortable about that, and so they don't do it. And that's just one example of all sorts of things. And so what happens is, when you have psychological discomfort in that fashion, you tend to act and react in a certain way. And that's just a matter of socialization. That's what I mean by socialization, that it becomes habits of response, that one feels right and the other feels wrong, and that's just where you go.
It also sounds like they're elites that don't exactly have the base they want.
Oh, yeah. Well, that is one of the ironies, right? Is that you think of, especially when they're Baptist, because Baptist is all about the democratic man. The Baptist is the working class who, so, but at the same time, the Baptist elites are all basically Anglican aristocracy, so whatever you want to call it. They're appointed by the king, the ruling class. No, but yeah. They but
that's
yeah,
fascinating.
I mean, that's the thing about the elites, is they're basically self-appointed, self-justifying. That's not true for all of them. There's a few guys I do like, and I think are deserve their position, and should be teaching pastors and others, or future pastors. But generally speaking, yeah, I think it's especially in the Baptist world, strangely, they're appointed from kind of a minority class to serve the minority interests, and they don't like the majority. That's just simply a case. I mean, I didn't listen to J.D. Greer's latest speech, but he seemed to imply that there's a whole lot of racists everywhere, closet racists all across the SBC. And Colin Hansen from TGC said that, I think maybe it was early 2017, after Trump was elected. He was interviewed by, I think, like an ABC, like a host, and it was like an extended interview. And he basically said that there is, within evangelicals, it was a shock to people like him. And now he knows for sure that there's like widespread racism across all of evangelicalism because they voted for Trump. And I think that interview is still available as well. It's really interesting because it was so much of a, like, here's this, I think he's Baptist, right? Here's this Baptist guy who's in this position of a sort of authority or leadership, and yet he's attacking the vast majority of people. But I mean, there's a place for that, but there is some irony in that fact that the elites are not grassroots. They don't come from the grass, they don't come from the bottom up. It's more like the powerful point them.
Let me ask you one thing you said that I think is important that our listener might not have followed. Is you said the kind of predominant kind of political posture they take is neo-Anabaptist, which is out of step with the Reformed tradition. What is this kind of, what does that mean? What is the neo-Anabaptist perspective on political engagement?
Yeah, I say it's neo-Anabaptist, and so I don't mean Anabaptist as in the separatists. I mean sort of a neo-Anabaptist where they kind of attack political power. They're afraid of political power. Not only afraid, but they say that Christians should not have it or seek it. And so they reject power entirely. And of course, in the classical Protestant tradition, a Christian having powers or Christians having powers certainly legitimate, and their principal end for that is to guard and protect the church and Christians, and so that's explicitly Christian. But in the very Anabaptist kind of also, I guess you could say, is also in the Baptist tradition somewhat, but this emphasis, this idea that we should not actually seek after power. Within the Baptist, the Baptist tradition, like Roger Williams, he would say the civil magistrate can't come to the aid of religion, but he can still actually implement peace. So in principle, a Christian could occupy, could have power. But the more Anabaptist wing, which I think is something that we see in Evangelical Elite now, is this fear of it, that the moment you have it, you have to the moment you have it, you almost have to apologize for having it. And the moment you have it, Thomas Thomas Acord, my co-host on our blog, we often kind of wonder, what if we found ourselves in a community where we're all Christians? I mean, just and not just a church, but a community that's large enough where we can kind of constitute as a civil community, and constitute civil government. What do you do then? And if you kind of do go through that thought experiment, these guys in that situation, they would almost feel compelled. They would be psychologically uncomfortable, and it would almost like they would destroy it. But if they did have power, if they did have a lot of power, what would they do? Well, we must do things that which would in the end destroy it. So we'd bring in a whole bunch of non-Christians, immigrate and share the love, and of course that would implode at least the Christianness of the area. So I mean, even if they're afraid of power, but then if they had power, they wouldn't use it to actually sustain a Christian community and protect the church, but they'd universalize it into the sense where it's just basically human, which is not wrong in principle, but in the end, all of power becomes this pure means of this moral witness.
Stephen, before we discuss our second topic, I just want to throw out some of what I'm realizing as I read these list of objections I have for Christians talking politically or getting involved politically, is almost all of them are just meant to neutralize me, right? They aren't a real argument. But I just want to give you a chance to quick respond to a few of these that probably our listeners hear if they've ever tried to engage in these things. So the first one would be, Christians in politics, that's just idolatry of political power or country.
Idolatry of country. The idolatry thing is whatever. It's a lot like the term fascism. It is whatever I don't like, is idolatry. Sure. Yeah. It's interesting what is considered idolatry, because you voting for people who you think are going to secure your rights, secure your liberty, and secure your peace for your family and your children's children, all that. That's idolatry, but the moment a shaman raids the Capitol Hill, suddenly it becomes a sacred space that's been violated, and you have to explode on Twitter about it for 2 months. And that's not idolatry at all. Again, it all makes sense if you just go back to what I said earlier.
Yeah. Despite the fact that Paul says we should actively seek to live peaceful, right? Do things to live a peaceful and quiet life, right?
Right. And pray for the king so that he would give us peace, so that the gospel can go forth.
Yeah. So here's another one. Jesus isn't left or right.
Well, the worst one is where someone says Jesus is not a Republican.
Oh yeah.
Sorry,
that's
that's the worst one. Not left or right. I mean, but of course he's not a Republican or Democrat. He's not registered to vote. And the ridiculous thing about that, again, I mean, I know what the point is. That see, you can attack the statement, or you can try to critique what they're up to. When someone says something like that, what they mean is that is okay to vote for Democrats. That's really what they mean. And people point that out on Twitter. So this is just, I think that you don't want to play their game, because their game is that they know you're just going to say, oh, well, he's not a Democrat either, or something like that. But you really have to critique what they're up to. And with that, again, it's trying to kind of broaden the choices you can make. And again, I'll just repeat what I said last time. If it's okay to vote for Democrats, then it's time for you all to start criticizing them as well. And not just the right. So,
I think it is so true that in all of these statements, right, it might be on its face a true statement, but there is why are you telling me that right now? Right. You're doing something with it. Right.
Look, I've not personally met anybody that would say Jesus was a Republican, or, something like that. Right. Like, obviously I've not.
Yeah. So this is really important. So they will assert things that are true, that everyone believes to be true, that no one would deny, but by saying it, they're implying that you, or this group of people that everyone kind of knows, does deny it. So so if someone says Jesus is not a Republican, we'd say, yeah, I affirm that statement. You could say that, or you don't really want to deny it and say he is a Republican. But yeah, I mean, that they're really just implying something else with that one. But to get on the theology of that, to actually respond to that, to participate in a political party and to think that this party is collectively better for you than the other party is not idolatry, or it's not saying that Jesus is a Republican, or that it's not baptized in the Republican Party. It's simply saying that I operate within the Republican Party because I think that it's this coalition of different people that I can influence for the policies I think are right. And I guess you could take it into idolatrous area. But if I'm going to be, I'll be a Republican my entire. Well, I don't know. Things are changing nowadays. But I used to think that I'd be a Republican my entire life, and that wasn't out of idolatry. It's just because I thought that was the best party for what I believe. I mean, if you believe the majority of the Republican Party platform, then why wouldn't you be a Republican? And if you disagree with that, well, you participate in the party politics to try to disagree with this or that, in order to remove this or that from the platform. So really, it's actually thinking the worst of the majority of evangelicals, like we talked before, when they could just actually think the best, which would be, hey, maybe this is just the best party available.
Well, I've heard maybe you should be a registered Democrat so you can influence their primaries in certain places. But before we go on to our second topic, the other day you tweeted, I think you said this is basically my political theology, which is Christianity is not mainly about politics, but Christian politics is good and a necessary consequence of Christianity. Do you just want to expand on that, and then we'll go to our next section?
That'll take a whole book.
Okay, well then we won't make you.
But the first part, yeah, Christianity is mainly not about politics. What I mean is that the gospel is mainly about, to put it positively, the gospel is mainly about eternal life. It's about restoring righteousness and reconciling you before God, and in some sense bringing you back to the original intent of the garden, which was that Adam and his progeny would eventually inherit, or not merit. I want to be precise, but usually or eventually kind of achieve eternal life. And so Christ actually restored our ultimate end, which would be something heavenly and above, in a sense, above nature. But anyway, that means that the gospel is not really about politics. So it has consequences for politics and for Christian politics. and that means that for Christian politics, it means that it's okay to have a Christian culture. It's okay to have a civil government that explicitly wants to protect and secure the good operations of the church, and peace, security, tranquility of the church, and other aspects that Christians, that other people should know, but should know to be good and moral, but Christians know through Scripture and grace, so such as abortion, gay marriage, that sort of thing. And that would be a sort of Christian politics, even though it should be human politics, because it's a matter of justice and natural duty. But I guess that's a short version.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen Wolfe. Make sure you guys join us next week for the second part of this interview, where he explains the theology of the two kingdoms, which is so important for Reformed political theology. Also, here's a big favor you could do for us. Leave us a comment or question on our Facebook, or send us a message, or email us at restlesspodcasting@gmail.com, because we are doing a feedback show and we would love to answer more of your questions and engage with you more. So make sure you come back next week, and we'll talk to you later.